Hi, let's see the AngularJS. AngularJS is the framework which is used on the client side, that it works in the browser, and it follow the pattern called as model view controller. Model view controller, it's already been used on the server side, for example, like struts to Spring Hibernate, or Spring, specifically Spring MVC, and even in the PHP or the Ruby on Rails also it has been used. While AngularJS is the uh, framework which works on the browser side, that it has been written in JavaScript, and it is a MVC pattern which is implemented on the Java side. So AngularJS, we need to define a module first, and then in that module need to define the config. In config, we will define the routes in the sense, whatever the URL is there, according to that the controller, the scope, and the view will change. And then the inside the view there will be directives, or which will called as tag libraries. While the scope is typically page scope or root scope, that is the application context scope or the page context scope. And the data is maintained, and events, all that events will be handled by the controller. And then controller can talk to the factory or the services, and that factory or services will talk to the RESTful API on local server or on the cloud. So the factory or the services will make specifically the AJAX calls, which are deferred AJAX calls. And then whenever the response it will come to the factory or service, it will resolve the object. Resolve in the sense, it will populate the data into the objects inside the scope inside a controller. And then there is a two-way binding between the data inside the scope and the view. So when we change something in the view, let's say we have a text box in the view, we change something in the view, it will automatically get changed in the scope object, that is the object inside the scope. And if we change something, so let's say we give a ajax call and data come from the RESTful APIs, and we set it inside the controller inside the scope, then the data on the view, that is whatever the things we are viewing on the page, will get refreshed. So it is called as two-way binding. So let's see the code one by one. So very first, I'll be showing you how to write the where the AngularJS application starts. So very first thing which will get loaded inside the application is the document, that is the index.jsp. Whenever you open something, the first thing first will get loaded is the index.php or index.jsp. So inside index.jsp or in the php file, we need to write the first statement specifically as html, and then the ngapp. So this is actually the bootstrap of AngularJS, where the application starts. So whenever ngapp is it's found in the HTML page, and if you have included the AngularJS or the AngularJS route, then AngularJS will come to know, or this JavaScript will come to know this is an AngularJS app, and then it will start to find this module by name login app. So we need to create a module with name login app inside that. Okay, so let me go to the JavaScript where I have written the login app. So inside login app, I have to define the module first. So as we have seen, we have the module, we have to define the module first. So inside here, what I have done, I have defined a module with login app, and inside login app I am injecting the dependencies. So in C you have done the include, or in PHP you do the include, in Java you do the imports and all that. So it's a similar kind of stuff. These modules are already defined by someone else, and I'm just including in my login app, so that I can call these or the APIs from these modules. So somebody had already written some modules which can be used or which can be consumed, which APIs can be consumed by the other people. So it's a helpful module. So this is Angular Bootstrap UI. These are the Angular cookies. This is specifically a loading bar, similar to the YouTube loading bar which you see on the top. This is the ng route, specifically used for routing, and this is for the internationalization or the globalization, specifically used for the long languages. And then after that, as we have seen, we have to define the config. So inside login app, this is the login app. Inside login app, what I'm doing, I'm defining a config. So now what config do actually is, config have the route provider, and then the I have used one more module which is called as the constants values. So it's nothing but the constants like private static finder or something that like that, which will be stored inside the constant values, and I can access as per my requirements. So in route provider, what I'm saying is when. So whenever, let's say, my login route will come, what controller will get activated? So the login controller will get activated. So I need to define somewhere the login controller. Okay. And then what template URL? So specifically AngularJS uses templates. So whenever there will be /login in the URL, then a template or a HTML inside AngularJS, Angular views folder, login HTML will get loaded. And then the scope or the controller will get loaded with the name login controller. So let me go to login controller now. So login controller is nothing but the controller module specifically. So inside login controller, inside login app, I have defined a controller with name login controller, and these are again dependencies which I will be needing to utilize or to call some APIs. So inside scope, what I am doing, inside scope I am defining a user, I am defining a username. Inside user so this is nothing but similar to kind of a JSON object. And then I'll be writing some functions inside the scope or some other functions which are outside the scope. So inside the scope I have written a login user, common.service toggle processing, and then common login service. So this is nothing but a service which I'm calling from this controller. So very first, what I have done, I have defined a login app, I injected dependencies, then I have written a route which says whenever there will be URL like login, the login controller will get loaded. Now let me go to the Angular views login HTML. So inside the Angular views, there is a login.html. So inside login.html, you might be able to see that two-way binding how I have done. So two-way binding, for that there is a tag or the directive which is used as ng model, Angular model. So model view controller. So this is a model. What is the model? So inside scope there is an object named user, and it has a property called password. So you can see here what I have defined inside scope. I have defined a user, and user has a property called username, password, contact, language selected, etc. Okay. So in login, now let's say I have entered something in this input, inside input, then there will be two-way binding. So whenever I have typed something inside this input, it will bind to the scope, inside scope, the user, and to the inside the user, that is the password attribute. Okay, so that is the two-way binding. Now how I can find fire an event? So there is a again one more directive which is called as ng click. So here you can see ng click. So ng click, what I have written on ng click login user. So login user, again where it is getting called from, it is getting called from the inside the scope. So I need to define a login user function inside the scope. So inside login controller, what I have defined, inside scope I have defined a login user controller. So whenever I enter the data over here in username and password, it will get populated over here. It will automatically, because of two-way binding, the username and password get populated. Then what I am doing, once I click this button, which is a login button on the login page, then login user event will get fired. So what will happen, the login user event will get fired, so it will call the login services. So now let me go to the login services. So inside JS, inside login, I have written a login services. So all these JS files I need to include in the index.php or login.php, wherever I'll be calling this function. So inside that, what method we have called inside login service, we have called a login method to which we are passing the user object inside that scope, which is getting populated because of two-way binding from login HTML. So it goes to login services now. Inside login services, the login method will get called. So this is nothing but the user which is inside the scope of login controller. So that is the page context or page scope. So it will come here, and then what I'm doing, I'm deferring the Ajax call. So deferring an Ajax call means we are giving the Ajax call and it's getting deferred. So unless and until response comes, the data or the response data will not get resolved. So once we have the response, so it's nothing but an Ajax call inside the Angular.js. So we generally write $Ajax in jQuery. So over here it's a $HTTP with method post. I'm sending the data, which is nothing but a user, and then the URL. This is again a constant values, which is like public static final, something like in Java. And then it has some values. So let me show you constants as well. Inside login, inside common, I've defined this login constants. So if you go to that, so it's nothing but the server host is nothing but the API. So what are the local host slash API slash login, and it is just to avoid that caching, I am appending a token. So there will be no caching for this specific URL, and once it success, then default.resolve the response data. So let's say I'm getting some response from the RESTful URL, whatever I have called. The RESTful URL is like localhost slash API slash login. So once I have that data, it will get resolved and I will get it here in login controller. Where? Here. And these are the two callbacks which I am calling: login success and login failure. So if the login is success, I mean if you are getting the 200 as the response, this method will get called, and if there is some error, let's say 500 or anything, this method will get called. So in the response, what I'm doing, common service toggle processing. So it's like toggle processing is nothing but showing some overlay when I click the button and hiding overlay once I get the response. And then what I'm doing in the local storage. So this is HTML5 feature I'm using. And what are the response data I have got inside data? So in response data, there will be data object, and inside data object I'm getting this attributes: first name, last name, role, and that I am actually setting inside the local storage sessions. And if what are the response data I am getting, let's say status is fall, and the error code I'm getting 1, then what I'll be displaying, again a common service I have used, and show alert. Show alert is nothing but it will show some pop-up with translate. So translate is nothing but whatever this Pascal translate I have injected, this API I am using right now. So what it will do, so it will find the key inside the properties file which I am loading. Maybe it's like, if it is French it's FR, it will, if it is English it will be EN, something like that, and it will try to find out this key, activate account. So it will display a proper message for that. Let's say if I want to do internationalization on the UI side, how I have to write login and then the translate. So home, then they translate. So specific button, let's say I'm using French, then specific login and home in French language it will get displayed. Okay. So these are some tag libraries which are used like ng repeat. So what is ng repeat? Let's say I'm getting a data in a JSON array and I want to show it in a table inside a view, HTML view. So I can use the ng repeat. So the flow is very simple. It's nothing but model view controller, and I have written services as well just to have follow the single responsibility principle or highly cohesive stuff. So very first, what I have done, I have defined a module. I have done the dependency injection. So some third-party libraries on which I am dependent on. Then I have defined the config. So inside config, what I have done, uh, I have defined the route provider, and whenever some URL will come, what page I need to show and what controller it will handle. Inside controller, what I have written, inside controller I have written the models which I need to use in the view, and then the events, whatever events, let's say ng click. So ng click directly I have used on ng click, what I have to do. So I have defined a function inside a scope and that I have called on the ng click. So login user function I have defined. And then there will be two-way binding in the scope object, the object inside the scope, inside the controller, and the login, the view or the template which you will be showing right now on that specific URL route pattern. And then the ng model, so this user is the object inside the scope and it has the attribute with the username. So this is a two-way binding with this input. So if I change input value from the UI, it will reflect to the object inside the scope inside the controller. And if some data comes from the response of Ajax call and it get populated. So for example, in login controller, when there is a success, the data is coming from response data, and if I set that data to the scope inside the scope, so I can set something like let's say the response data first name I want to set in the scope. So how I can write like this, dollar scope dot, so user is the object, and then uh, the user, and then let's say first name I want to set, and I can assign the data whichever I have received from an Ajax call to this. Okay, so this is nothing but I'm assigning the data whatever I have got from the Ajax call. But these things you don't need to do here, rather you can do these things in the controller itself. Okay, this is the controller itself. So the service is nothing but it is just getting the data from the REST APIs or the SOAP based services or whatever. Okay, so services are typically talking to the backend. Controller is typically where it's kind of what I can say, mediator between the views and then the model objects. While this is the app where this is the login app where you define the app module and then the routes and then the configs. Okay, so in that way you can define. And then in the this in the config you can, I have provided the translate provider. This is typically for internationalization. And let's say this is one more stuff where it's a kind of watch uh, where the whenever route changes I'll be showing the overlays. So this overlay will be displayed whenever the route change start in the sense, so whenever there is a change in the URL pattern, so let's say from login it changed to sign up, then it will be showing, it will show the overlay message. no, not overlay message, the overlay, so loading or something like that. So what things we have seen is module. We need to define the module first. Inside module, we need to define the configs. So config will, whenever the what route is present, what controller needs to load it and what view needs to load it. And there will be in between this, they will talk through the scope. Scope will have objects inside that, which will be viewed in the HTML template. And whenever you change something in the HTML template, it will updated inside the controller inside the scope. And in the views, we have seen the directives like ng-click, the and the ng-repeat. Similarly, there is one more object which is used ng-view. So for example, let's say I have a header and I have a side menu. So in specifically in Angular.js, when you click on a menu, certain page of the area will get refreshed. So it will get an Ajax call, it will get that template URL. So whatever the template URL is there, it will give an Ajax call and it will download that specific HTML as an Ajax response. And inside the Ajax response, then it will download that Ajax response, and then it will be viewed in the specific area which is called as ngview. So if you go to login PHP, you will able to see the ngview. This is the ngview tag. So some part is fixed, so navbar and all that is fixed, and only this part, div part, will get changed. Okay, so let me show you one sample example. So once I click login, you can see the login route. This is the route now. So whatever the page is getting displayed is this. So let's say I click on forget credentials, the route will change to forget cred, and this page will get refreshed. Other area will be as it is on the client side. And for this page, one Ajax call will go to the server and it will just return that HTML page content. And then these are nothing but these are bind ng bind to that model which is inside the scope. Okay, so very simple structure which the AngularJS follow: modules, configs, routes, then the controller will manage the views, and then controller will have the scope, and scope and view will have the binding, two-way binding. Views will have the directives. Controller will give the calls to factories will give call to the backend RESTfuls, and then RESTful will return the data to the factory and service, which are the default calls. So once the default call give the response, it will get resolved, and then it will reply, I mean it will give it back to the controller, and controller can update in the scope. And just because of two-way binding, it will also it will be updated in the view. This is a very simple structure of AngularJS framework. Thanks for watching.